I am going to talk about two temples that I was lucky enough to see in Rome, and they are the Temple to Venus Genetrix, which Julius Caesar dedicated, and the Temple to Mars Ultor that Augustus dedicated. And they are linked because Augustus was Caesar's adopted son who inherited his will when he was assassinated. So when I saw these temples in Rome recently, I had forgotten about studying them, but I think they are interesting because they're a piece of archaeology which tell you and point to the history of the period, and like specific history of the period, political history, which I find really interesting. So I wanted to share this with you guys, specifically why they dedicated them to these gods, and like when they vowed to dedicate them. So Caesar was battling against Pompey, and he famously crossed the Rubicon, and that started civil war because he was governing Gaul, or modern day France, and when you're governing a province, you're not allowed to go past the Pomerium, which is like the sacred boundary of Rome, with your army behind you. You're supposed to step down as a governor and then enter Rome as a private citizen. But Caesar didn't do this because he knew that he was going to be put on trial for his previous supposed illegal actions that he'd done. So he knew the Senate was going to put him on trial, so he decided to invade instead. So this starts the civil war, and he's fighting against Pompey, who's the other great consul of the time, who's on the Senate's side. And the Battle of Pharsalus is the decisive battle in Greece, where Julius Caesar vows to dedicate this temple to Venus Genetrix. And the reason that he dedicates it to Venus is that he is part of the Julian family, or the Julii family, and they all descend from one of the founding myths of Rome, in that in the Aeneid you have Aeneas and Ascanius, and Ascanius is Aeneas's son, and another name for Ascanius is Iulus, and that is sort of the start of the Julian family. So they all take descendants from that, and Aeneas's mother in the Aeneid is the goddess Venus. So by dedicating this temple to Venus Genetrix, Caesar is thanking Venus and the other gods for supporting him, and pointing to his sort of semi-divine status, because he is related to this goddess, related to Venus, and that is the whole sort of the birthright of his family name, of the Julii. So that's one part of it, and that's one reason that he dedicated the temple. But it was also just to show in general that the gods are on his side, and to make him seem like a benevolent ruler, because look, he was successful in the civil war, and he definitely did do some illegal things, and democracy kind of fell away, but at least he's dedicating a temple to the gods, and at least he's still, observing the religious aspects of Roman life. So in that way, he was sort of doing something for the people, and the forum that he was building it in was like on either side had a massive colonnade, and that was used for like tradespeople and even lawyers, I think, but tradespeople and business people going about their business, so the people could go there, and it was a bit like a marketplace. And the temple was dedicated in 46 BC, and then Caesar died 2 years later in 44 BC, and he was assassinated. And then we move on to Augustus, or Octavian, before he becomes emperor. And Octavian was named Caesar's heir in his will, and in a similar way, Octavian is fighting in a civil war, and he also vows to, or he prays for help to the gods. He wants the gods on his side, and the god that he prays to is Mars Ultor, who is the god that he dedicates the temple to. And Mars Ultor means that the epithet afterwards means the Avenger, so Mars the Avenger. And it's because in the whole civil war, Octavian is trying to avenge his father, Julius Caesar, who got assassinated by Cassius and Brutus. So the decisive battle was the Battle of Philippi, I'm pretty sure. I may have got the battles mixed up because they both begin with P, but I'm pretty sure it's Philippi, and he vowed to build this temple to Mars if he supported him and allowed him to win the battle. And he did win the battle, so he built this great temple in the Forum, which doesn't have much left remaining. I may put the photos on the video which I took, but I think it has just 2 columns out of the 8 in the front, and then Caesar's temple has like a corner piece of the columns. But lots of these temples from the past were destroyed by fires and then rebuilt by later emperors. So Caesar's Temple of Venus Genetrix isn't actually those columns that will probably be on the video are not actually the columns that were built in his time, but I still found it really impressive to think that that is where the temple stood and it was rebuilt in the same spot. And to know all of this history about it is just really satisfying. And because it is a ruin, there weren't like any tourists there at all looking at it. It was just my friend Harry and I looking, and I was explaining some of the stuff to him, and everyone else was looking at either the better surviving stuff or the modern intact stuff. But they were, in terms of location, we were on this massive pedestrian street, which I'm pretty sure Mussolini built, which unfortunately took away quite a lot of the evidence from the imperial forums. But on either side of the road, you can look over the balcony to where the remains are, and you have Caesar's Forum on the right and Augustus's Forum on the left, and Trajan's Column is just down the road, and the Colosseum is on the very end of the street. It's just fantastic going to Rome and seeing everything so close together. So much history. The other thing I was going to say is that Augustus's temple to Mars Ultor included 2 side areas, or almost like ovals, like semicircular, and in these semicircles he made statues. He had statues put up of great men of the past, and it was just really satisfying to see the shape of the semicircle still there, because he put up statues of his enemies, and he put up mythical heroes, and there was a massive, in his forum, there's a massive statue of himself too, and to just peer over the balcony and see all of this architecture and archaeology there and know the history was just really satisfying. Yeah, I think I don't know much more about both of the temples other than why they were dedicated and a bit about the history of like the battles and Augustus coming back. Oh, another thing about Augustus dedicating the temple is that he didn't straight away win the civil war and then come back and dedicate it. It took him, like, he was basically in power, like the de facto ruler, for a good like 13 years before he dedicated this temple, until the standards of Crassus were returned from the Parthians, because Crassus lost the war against the Parthians and supposedly died by the Parthians pouring molten gold down his throat because he was so rich. He was the richest man in Rome at that point. And they took the famous standard of the Roman legion, the eagle, the golden eagle, and it was only when that got returned from the Parthians that Augustus put this temple for Mars Ultor and properly dedicated it to the gods. Because if he had done it before, it would seem like he was celebrating a victory against Rome, like for a civil war against Roman blood, which wasn't normally done. It did become more common with later emperors, because later emperors often did just fight rival Roman generals. But in this period early in the empire, all of the previous triumphs and temples that were dedicated were all against defeating neighbouring peoples, not a civil war. You can't do that because it's hard to celebrate Roman culture and victory when you defeat your own kind. So that's all the information I have for you. Thank you very much for watching, and see you in the next one. Goodbye.